Everyone knows Judas Iscariot as the man who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. But there is a part of this story that almost no one has the courage to face. Because Judas's true downfall did not begin with the kiss of betrayal. It began much earlier, inside the heart. And the most frightening part? It was not the betrayal that destroyed Judas. It was what came after. Guilt, despair, and a decision with no return, irreversible in human eyes. In this video, you will understand how Judas became lost within himself, what happened when the money lost its value, and why this story continues to be a warning for anyone who is trading the eternal for something temporary. Judas Iscariot almost always appears as the heaviest name in the story, as if everything could be summed up in the figure of an evil man far removed from anyone's reality. But the most frightening part is not only what he did in the end, but the fact that he walked close to the truth, and even so, slowly became lost within himself. He heard, saw, participated, stood near Jesus, and yet still allowed his heart to lean toward the wrong place. And that is exactly why this story remains so current. Because it is not only about a traitor, it is about someone who stood near the light and still chose to feed the darkness within. And maybe that is where this message becomes uncomfortable in a very personal way. Because many people have never betrayed with a kiss, never sold someone for silver, never done something that would draw everyone's attention, but they have already betrayed their own conscience in silence. They have already gone against their own faith, against their own values, against what they knew was right, all without making any noise on the outside. In the eyes of others, everything stayed normal, everything stayed under control, everything looked in place. But inside, something had already begun to break, and that kind of fall almost always begins before it becomes visible. In this video, you will follow what happened to Judas after the betrayal, because his story did not end when Jesus was handed over. What comes next is even stronger. Guilt tightening its grip, the coins losing their value, the attempt to turn back, despair growing, death, and the meaning of that field bought with the money of betrayal. Every part of this journey carries a deep warning about choices, conscience, and consequences. It is not just a sequence of biblical facts. It is a hard mirror of what happens when someone trades what truly matters for something that passes quickly. And the more the story moves forward, the harder it becomes to look at Judas without also looking within. But this reflection was not recorded to push you away, but to make you stop and think with sincerity. Because the story of Judas Iscariot is not only about one man's mistake, but about the risk in any heart that begins to quietly negotiate what should never be negotiated. In this Easter season, when the crucifixion of Jesus Christ returns to the center of remembrance, this story carries even more weight. It invites you to face a question that is not always easy to answer. What may be being lost inside, even when everything still seems fine on the outside? And before reaching Judas's tragic end, we need to go back to the point where it all began. The betrayal did not begin with the kiss. It began in the heart. Judas Iscariot did not become a traitor in the moment he kissed Jesus. That gesture only revealed what had already been growing inside him for some time. In John 12:4-6, the Bible shows that he was already handling money badly, hiding corruption beneath a seemingly proper speech. Later, in Luke 22:3-6, when he agrees to bargain over Jesus, the text makes it clear that the fall was not born in that conversation, but in a heart that had already been surrendering inwardly. The man who would later be seen as a renegade before everyone was already carrying, in silence, crooked choices that no one could measure with precision. The final betrayal, then, did not begin with the kiss. It began much earlier, in the inner life. This kind of attitude repeats itself in many people's lives because no one destroys their own story all at once. Before that, they begin giving in through small, almost invisible compromises. The person makes agreements with what they once condemned, justifies the error, pushes their conscience aside for later, and keeps living as if nothing were happening. It is like a hidden crack in a wall. On the outside, everything still seems firm, but on the inside, the structure is already compromised. When the collapse appears, everyone is shocked by the result, but the process had already been underway for a long time, leaving that heart more and more renegade through its own decisions. And if Judas's end began before the public act, what signs were already announcing that something inside him was falling apart? After the betrayal came the shock of reality. After the betrayal came the shock of reality, and Judas Iscariot could no longer escape what he had done. In Matthew 27, 3-4, the Bible shows that when he saw Jesus condemned, he realized the true weight of his own choice. The coins that had once seemed like an advantage lost their value in the face of the guilt that was now crying out inside him. What had looked like gain became a sign of condemnation, because there are decisions that feel light in the moment, but become unbearable afterward. It was there that he discovered too late that there are agreements the hand will accept, but the conscience cannot carry. This biblical story inspires us to reflect on what happens when someone acts on impulse and only later realizes the weight of the choice. It is like signing something without thinking and discovering too late the consequence that had been hidden between the lines. At first, the decision seems useful, advantageous, and even easy to justify. But later, it demands an emotional price that breaks a person down inside. Many people can endure the benefit of a moment, but they cannot endure the guilt that arrives when the silence tightens around them. And when reality finally falls upon the soul, where does a person run when they realize the mistake has already gone too far? The 30 pieces of silver lost their value. The 30 pieces of silver lost their value the moment Judas Iscariot's conscience awakened to the magnitude of what he had done. In Matthew 27, 4-5, he returns the money to the religious leaders and confesses that he has betrayed innocent blood, trying to relieve a pain that was already burning inside him. But the response he receives is harsh and indifferent. That is your problem. The reward that once seemed important now could no longer bring peace, erase the guilt, or repair the path he had chosen. Judas realized too late that the price he had received outwardly would never be able to calm the despair that was growing within him. We can recognize this pattern when someone is encouraged into wrongdoing, deceived by advantages, and then left alone at the very moment they most need help. It is like the person who was used while they were useful, but soon afterward was treated coldly, as if their pain had no value at all. When it is time to fall, there is always someone to push, approve, or make it easier. But when the conscience grows heavy, almost no one stays nearby. Judas Iscariot tried to turn back, but he sought comfort in the very hands of those who had no compassion for his suffering. And when the soul finds itself surrounded by guilt, how can it discern the right place to seek help before despair speaks louder? Remorse is not the same thing as repentance. Remorse is not the same thing as repentance. And the story of Judas Iscariot makes that painfully clear. In Matthew 27, 3-5, He feels the weight of guilt, falls into despair, and finds himself crushed by what he has done. But he does not return to God. When that pain is compared with Peter in Luke 22:61-62 and John 21:15-17, the difference becomes striking. Both men wept, but only one allowed himself to be restored. Judas felt the wound laid open, yet sank into his own collapse instead of seeking healing. His suffering was real, but the direction he took after the fall made all the difference. This still lives on in human experience, because many people cry over their sin, but do not surrender their pain to God. Remorse is feeling the wound throbbing. Repentance is allowing it to be treated, even when touching it hurts deeply. There are people who are not suffering only because they failed, but because they insist on carrying alone a weight that has already gone beyond their strength. They accuse themselves, punish themselves inwardly, and shut themselves off, as if isolation could solve what only surrender can heal. And when guilt truly tightens its grip, what defines a person's future, the pain they feel, or the place they choose to carry that pain? Judas's end was tragic, and the field became a memorial of shame. The end of Judas Iscariot was tragic, and his story did not end only with death, but with a name forever linked to shame. In Matthew 27:5-8, he hangs himself, and the returned silver is used to buy the potter's field. In Acts 1:18-19, the violent outcome connected to his fall and to the place marked by it appears. That piece of ground came to be called the Field of Blood, making visible a guilt that could no longer be hidden. Tradition connects this place to Akeldama in Jerusalem as a memory heavy with tragedy, without needing to go beyond what the text allows us to affirm with certainty. What Judas tried to end in silence became a public mark, a lasting reminder, and a warning for generations. This shows that certain choices leave scars so deep that they go beyond the moment and become memory, location, and a sign of warning. There are mistakes whose impact does not stop at the moment they are committed, because they keep echoing in the name, in the memory, and in the consequences left behind. It is like when one thoughtless decision changes a path so deeply that the place of the fall comes to represent everything that happened there. Judas Iscariot did not become associated with a missed chance to do right, but with a breaking point that forever carried the weight of betrayal. And if some decisions can mark even the ground where the pain happened, what does this story still reveal about the emptiness that comes after the fall? The story of Judas Iscariot is not only about betrayal, and that is what makes everything even more serious. It also speaks about the danger of placing too much value on money, on appearances, on pride, and on the things of this world, thinking it is possible to carry all of that without losing peace. Judas walked near Jesus, heard his teachings, saw miracles, lived moments that many people wish they could have lived, and yet he was still drifting away on the inside. And that leaves a very strong warning, because being close to the sacred does not by itself mean having a transformed heart. Sometimes a person is surrounded by truth, yet still keeps feeding choices that push them farther away. When we look at Judas and Peter, we realize that both of them failed, both of them wept, and both of them felt the weight of what they had done. But Peter repented, while Judas remained trapped in remorse. Peter fell, felt pain, but came back. Judas fell, felt guilt, but gave himself over to despair. And here is a reflection that shakes anyone. Remorse is when the pain of sin suffocates you inside. But sincere repentance is when a person takes that pain and brings it back to God. It is not just feeling sadness over what happened. It is deciding not to remain far away after the fall. And maybe that is exactly where this story speaks so powerfully to you. Because there are people who are not suffering only because of what they did, but because they are trying to carry alone a weight that has already become constant pain in the mind, in the chest, and in the silence of the night. Judas shows what happens when someone chooses the wrong value and stops in remorse. Peter shows that even after an ugly fall, there is still a way back when the heart truly surrenders. Deep down, the great question is not only who failed more, but what each one did after realizing their own mistake. And in this Easter season, when you remember the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, this story becomes even more powerful. It was not recorded only to shock, but to awaken the heart and show that no advantage is worth the price of losing peace. The money remained, the field remained, the name remained, but the peace did not remain. The most frightening thing about Judas is not only the fact that he betrayed Jesus, but that he stood so close to salvation and still lost himself on his own path. So the reflection that remains is simple and deep at the same time. When your conscience grows heavy, do you do what Peter did and return, or do you do what Judas did and sink into remorse? If this video spoke to you, write in the comments, "I do not want to trade the eternal for the temporary." Share this with someone who needs to hear this reflection this Easter. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep following more biblical stories applied to real life. And this Easter series does not end here. Watch now, the night Peter denied Jesus and what happened after. This message will surprise you.